James and Sarah Miller appeared to have the perfect life. To those who knew them, they were a well-matched couple, successful, respected, and deeply connected. James, a dedicated businessman, spent long hours managing his company, ensuring financial stability for his family. Sarah, on the other hand, was a college professor, admired by her students and colleagues for her intelligence and charm. Together, they lived in a beautiful suburban home with their teenage son, Ethan. Friends often envied their seemingly ideal marriage, and their neighbors regarded them as the picture of stability. But behind the facade of happiness, cracks had begun to form, cracks that James had been too preoccupied to notice. For years, his work had taken priority, requiring frequent business trips that left Sarah alone for days, sometimes weeks, at a time. She had never openly complained, always appearing supportive of his ambitions. But in recent months, subtle changes in her behavior suggested something was amiss. James first noticed it when she started dressing differently. Her usual modest attire replaced with stylish dresses and carefully applied makeup. She claimed she wanted to feel good about herself, and James, trusting her completely, accepted the explanation without question. Then came the late nights at work. Sarah, who had always been punctual, began returning home later than usual, sometimes well past midnight. When James asked, she dismissed his concerns with plausible excuses: faculty meetings, student counseling, extra responsibilities assigned by the principal. He wanted to believe her, to trust that her long hours were merely the result of dedication to her career. But the unease lingered, growing stronger each time she glanced at her phone with a nervous smile, or stepped outside to take a call in private. One evening, while waiting for her to return home, James absent-mindedly scrolled through social media. That's when he came across a photo that sent a chill through his spine. It was a group picture taken at a college event. Sarah stood in the background, engaged in what seemed like an intimate conversation with Dr. Richard Evans, the principal of her college. The way she leaned toward him, the subtle smile on her lips, the intensity in their eyes. It all felt wrong. Something about the image made James uneasy, though he convinced himself he was overthinking. Doubt began creeping into his mind, but he quickly pushed it aside. He refused to be the kind of husband who jumped to conclusions, who accused without proof. After all, Sarah had never given him a reason to suspect her before. Yet, as the days passed, his unease deepened. He caught her staring at her phone, smiling at messages she never shared. He noticed her perfume lingering stronger than usual when she came home late, and there were days when she seemed distant, lost in thought, barely responding to his questions. Still, James chose to ignore the signs, convincing himself that his fears were irrational. But deep inside, a storm was brewing, one that would soon unravel everything he thought he knew about his wife. James had always believed that trust was the foundation of his marriage. Even as doubts crept into his mind, he reminded himself that Sarah was his wife, the mother of his child, and the woman he had spent over 15 years building a life with. But the feeling that something was wrong refused to leave him. He told himself he was overthinking, that stress from work was making him paranoid. Yet, when he checked the mailbox one evening, his entire world shifted. Among the usual bills and advertisements was an unmarked envelope. The paper felt thin between his fingers, almost fragile, as if it carried something too dangerous to be held. He opened it, his heartbeat quickening with every second. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a short but devastating message. The letter claimed that Sarah was having an affair with Richard Evans, the principal of her college. The words were sharp, cutting through him like a blade. It wasn't just a vague accusation. The letter included specific details, dates, and places where they had met in secret. It was clear that whoever had written this knew more than they should. At first, James wanted to dismiss it as a cruel joke. Perhaps someone was trying to ruin Sarah's reputation. Maybe it was the work of a jealous colleague. But as he reread the letter, his stomach twisted. The locations mentioned aligned with times Sarah had come home late, the dates matching perfectly with the nights she claimed to have stayed at the college for extra work. The coincidences were too many to ignore. James felt his hands tremble as he clutched the letter. He wanted to confront Sarah immediately, to demand an explanation, but something held him back. If she truly was unfaithful, she would never admit it without proof. He needed to see it with his own eyes. Over the next few days, James became a different man. He started paying closer attention to Sarah's routine, noting the times she left and returned. He checked her phone when she was in the shower, though he found nothing suspicious. No messages, no calls. Nothing that pointed to an affair. But James knew that people in secret relationships weren't careless. If Sarah was hiding something, she would be doing it well. Then one night, he decided to follow her. Sarah had told him she had a late faculty meeting, but something about the way she said it felt off. James waited until she left, then got into his car and followed at a distance. She didn't drive to the college. Instead, she took a different route, leading him into a quiet part of town. His heart pounded as she pulled into the parking lot of a small, discreet hotel. Moments later, another car arrived. James watched in horror as Richard Evans stepped out. Sarah greeted him with a familiarity that made James sick. They exchanged a look that left no doubt in his mind. His worst fears had come true. The woman he loved had betrayed him. James sat in his car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles turned white. His breathing was shallow, his chest rising and falling in rapid succession as he watched Sarah and Richard disappear into the hotel. A part of him still wanted to believe there was some innocent explanation, that maybe this wasn't what it looked like. But deep inside, he knew the truth. The way they looked at each other, the secrecy, the late nights. It all made sense now. His wife, the woman he had devoted his life to, had betrayed him. His mind raced between emotions. At first, there was disbelief, a desperate attempt to deny what was happening. But then came the anger, burning through him like wildfire. He had given Sarah everything. He had worked tirelessly to build a life for them, to provide security, and this was how she repaid him. With lies and deceit. The rage was so overwhelming that he could barely think straight. He wanted to storm into the hotel, confront them, demand answers. But he didn't. Not yet. Instead, he drove home in a daze, his thoughts spiraling out of control. Memories of their marriage flashed through his mind. The vacations, the birthdays, the promises they had made to each other. Had it all been a lie? How long had she been seeing Richard? Was Ethan just as deceived as he was? The pain of betrayal gnawed at his insides, making it impossible to focus on anything else. He had never felt so powerless in his life. The following days were torturous. Sarah acted as if nothing had changed, smiling at him, asking about his day, going about her routine like she wasn't tearing their family apart. James found himself studying her every move, dissecting every word she said. Each time she picked up her phone, each time she left the house, he wondered if she was going to see Richard. The mere thought sent waves of fury crashing through him. Sleep became impossible. He lay awake at night, staring at the ceiling, imagining the moments Sarah had shared with another man. His appetite disappeared, and even at work, he struggled to concentrate. His colleagues noticed the change in him, his short temper, his distracted nature, but no one dared to ask what was wrong. One evening, as Sarah laughed at something on her phone, James felt something snap inside him. How could she be so at ease while he was drowning in agony? He realized then that he couldn't live like this. He wouldn't be the man who silently suffered while his wife betrayed him. If Sarah wanted to throw away everything they had built together, there would be consequences. James had never thought of himself as a violent man, but something dark was stirring within him. He could feel it growing, consuming him with each passing day. He didn't know what he was going to do yet, but one thing was certain. This wasn't going to end the way Sarah expected. The storm outside mirrored the one raging inside James as he sat alone in the dimly lit living room, his hands clasped. Together, his mind lost in a sea of thoughts. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, each second pushing him closer to a breaking point. Sarah had told him she would be late again. Another excuse, another lie. James had stopped believing her words days ago. He already knew where she was, who she was with, and what she was doing. The betrayal had festered inside him, poisoning every rational thought he had left. He wasn't the same man anymore. He had become someone else, someone who could no longer accept being deceived. He reached for the small safe hidden beneath the bookshelf, his hands steady despite the rage coursing through him. The metallic click of the lock disengaging was deafening in the silent room. Inside lay a gun, untouched for years, a relic of past security concerns. He had bought it to protect his family, never imagining that one day he would consider using it for something else. The weight of the weapon felt heavier than he remembered. Or maybe it was the burden of what he was about. To do that made it seem so. He sat there for a long time, staring at it, questioning whether he had lost all control, or if he was finally taking it back. Hours passed before he heard the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. The familiar hum of the engine sent his pulse racing. Sarah was home. James tightened his grip on the gun, his heart pounding violently against his ribs. Footsteps approached the front door, casual, unaware of the darkness waiting on the other side. When the door swung open, Sarah stepped inside, shaking the rain from her coat, humming a soft tune to herself. She didn't even notice James sitting in the shadows, watching her every move. Then she turned, her eyes meeting his, and for a brief moment, there was silence. A flicker of confusion crossed her face before realization set in. There was something different about him tonight, something unsettling in the way he stared at her, unblinking, unmoving. Her smile faltered. She opened her mouth to speak, but before a single word could escape, James raised the gun. The shot rang out, loud and final, shattering the fragile illusion of their marriage. Sarah's body jerked backward, her eyes widening in shock before she collapsed onto the floor. A crimson pool spread across the polished wood beneath her, the life draining from her as the storm raged on outside. Upstairs, a door creaked open. James barely had time to process what he had done before a voice called out, "Ethan." He had forgotten about his son, forgotten that he was home, forgotten that he would be the one to discover the horrifying truth. The sound of his footsteps rushing down the stairs sent a fresh wave of reality crashing over James. It was too late. There was no turning back. Ethan's scream tore through the house like a knife. James remained frozen, still gripping the gun, unable to move, unable to speak. His son stood at the foot of the stairs, his wide eyes locked on the horrific scene before him. Sarah lay motionless on the floor, her once vibrant presence reduced to a lifeless body drenched in crimson. The weight of what had just happened crushed James all at once. There was no undoing it, no taking it back. Ethan stumbled forward, his breath coming in short, panicked gasps as he knelt beside his mother. His trembling hands hovered over her, unsure whether to touch her, to shake her, to beg her to wake up. But she wouldn't. She never would. He turned to James, his face contorted in disbelief, horror, and betrayal. The gun slipped from James's grip, clattering onto the floor. His own son was looking at him like he was a monster. And maybe that's what he was now. There were no words he could say that would make this right. No excuse, no justification, nothing that could erase what he had just done. Then came the sound that sealed his fate, the distant wail of sirens. Someone had called the police. Maybe a neighbor had heard the gunshot, or maybe Ethan, in his shock, had already dialed for help without even realizing it. James didn't try to run. He didn't move at all. He simply stood there, staring at the life he had just destroyed. The flashing red and blue lights painted the walls in streaks of color as officers burst through the door, weapons drawn. Commands were shouted, but James barely registered them. Strong hands grabbed him, forcing him to the ground, pressing his face against the cold floor as metal cuffs locked around his wrists. He didn't resist. There was nothing left to fight for. The courtroom was packed when James stood trial. The case had captured the public's attention. An affair, a murder, a broken family. People debated whether Sarah's betrayal had pushed James over the edge, or if he had always harbored the capacity for violence. The prosecution painted him as a jealous husband who acted out of rage, while the defense argued that he was a man driven to insanity by heartbreak. But in the end, the jury saw only one truth: a man who had taken his wife's life in cold blood. The verdict came swiftly, guilty of second-degree murder. The sentence, life in prison. James barely reacted as the words were read. The weight of his crime had already settled deep within him. Nothing the court decided could change the fact that he had destroyed his own family. Ethan refused to look at him as he was led away. The boy who had once admired him, who had looked up to him as a father, now wanted nothing to do with him. And that, more than the prison walls that would soon surround him, was the true punishment.